look like I put you to sleep about that. No, I'm regretting my choice to like choose Sonic over Starbucks this morning. Because I'm like, it's the same color as my strawberry refresher, but this is a cherry limeade. It's not caffeinated. So I'm just like, wow, fading fast. But no, I'm listening. I didn't know it was gonna come upon me like a thief in the night. But no, yeah,
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Shay, and you are watching Shay with the Hobbies. We are here with the October episode, and I feel like that means we're on episode 9, because I feel like we're behind one. So I feel like we're on episode 9 on my channel. Obviously, there will be words to be like, yeah, this is the right one somewhere on the screen in a minute. So you'll see those. But we are on episode 9. This one ended up being a subscriber pick. The lovely Vina sent us a message about wanting us to talk about craft and fiction. And so today, that is what we are going to be talking about. But before we get into that, I'm going to let my lovely co-host introduce herself and say hello to you guys.
Hi, I'm Britt. My channel is Britt Writerly. It's a book and author too, where I talk about the intersection of literature and culture. ABC 123. If you like letters and numbers, then my channel might be a good pick for you. Head on over. Watch some videos if you like the vibe, because the vibe's not changing. Smash that like button, smash that big red button, and we can be internet friends.
I love it. Okay, so we're going to talk about what we mean when we talk about what is studying craft and fiction and what that looks like for us. And so that'll be our first question. What does studying craft and fiction mean to you, Grits Writerly?
Oh, she want me to go first. Okay. Studying craft means paying careful attention to the way something is put together, which involves really thinking about the book as a product, right? Not just like being in it as just fangirling over, oh, this story is really hitting, but really like, oh, this story is really hitting. It's really making me feel X, and X. How is that happening? When did this start? When did I get drawn in? For instance, now y'all know good and dang well I love this book. For me, the instant I heard Splendor, I said, oh, I was drawn in by just the naming of the magic system. Now, obviously more about the naming of the magic system draws me to Kofi and Ekon's story, but it starts with paying careful attention to what is making you be like, ooh, and how the writer capitalizes on those small moments to build your overall compulsion to keep reading. So for me, studying craft and fiction particularly, right? Because like Save the Cat, Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes, Timothy Hickson's volumes of book on writing and world building, those books tell you very specifically, like they're craft books, they're way more straightforward. But as writers who are readers, we want to be able to pull good lessons and good tips from peer work, so to speak. So for me, when I'm studying craft in a fiction book, it's paying really good attention to the emotions that the book is eliciting, good or bad, and pinpointing when that is happening and how it was done.
I definitely agree. My answer is very similar. I think for me, there are two types of studying craft in fiction books. I think there's studying the craft of writing as a writer, and then the craft of crafting a book as a business person, if that makes sense. And so like what I look at are are from like two different angles. So I look at like word choice, sentence structure, things like that. And I look at, like you said, like the emotions that they evoke, the thoughts they make me feel. I specifically emotions, because for me, I want my stories to always evoke emotions. And if you've read the 2 stories that I have that are out in the world, you know that I don't mind like darker topics, but I'm gonna make you laugh And I love like seeing how other authors make that possible. Like I love seeing how comedic relief is put into books, because to me, it's not really something that you can be taught in a craft book itself. It's something you have to see executed. And so like those are things that I like look for, the emotion part of it. And then the business part of it for me is like looking at like comparables, like what drew me to this book, the cover, how was the back blurb worded, what did it take to get me hooked, how did these things come together? Was it the font that got me? Was it the colors and the tones they put together? Was it the fact that it was a drawing picture? Like those are all things that you don't, to me, you can't get from an actual craft book. You have to get from spending time in books themselves. And I think that like it also works in like how you also have to study like trends, and you won't know trends just from seeing what people buy. You have to know trends from seeing what people read, right? Because it's not really the same. It's why a lot of craft books, some of them don't get as good for people, because they don't give you as many like rich examples of things. They like tell you titles, but you need to see how it was done. You need to do so that's what it means to me. It means to look at not just the craft of writing, but the crafting of a book itself. What have we learned in the last 2 years from the craft of an actual book? That books with Black kids on the cover are selling, right? We've learned that in crafting a book, that if you want to do a good job in selling a Black book, you get a bomb Black cover, you're going to increase the chances of that, whether the story is up there or not, right? So the follow-up to that is, what is your process for studying craft look like?
Yeah, so and I already sort of like started with like Beast of Prey. I'm gonna try not to hop ahead to the third question, which I can't quite remember. So I can't quite remember if I should say this now or save it for later, but I'll fit it in somewhere just in case I'll save it for later. Yeah, so, but first I just want to say that's a really good point about the business of making a book, especially if you want to do indie. You need to pay good attention to what is drawing you to that cover, because just because who's this, Simon and Schuster, I think it's Simon and Schuster. No, it's Penguin Teen. Just because Penguin Teen is not gonna buy #FirstFantasy doesn't mean that #FirstFantasy can't have a cover that looks as good as this, because someone made this. Like, someone employed by Penguin Teen created this. You get what you pay for. You find good cover designers, and you'll get a good cover. And so it's not like, oh, I need to go to the publishing house that publishes to do it. It's what elements are bringing it out. Is it the abstraction? Is it the fact that it's sort of like a Black that makes you focus on where the color is? Is it the singularity of the snake with the jungle background? Like, what is it? And so that's
right. Is it the letters mixing in with the picture and standing out from the picture? Is it
we're doing it right now? Y'all paying attention?
Faces? It's so many different things, right? Mm-hmm. And you learn about how companies play with covers, by what covers they release in what countries, by what's gonna sell more in what places. Like, but you won't know that if you're not looking at the books themselves.
Yeah, it's a lot of very careful attention. And that sense of attention has to be curated, because when I first got into like the booktube space, book Twitter, Bookstagram was the last of the places I dipped my toe, ironically, because that's where I am primarily now. But like, I just didn't know. My attention was not curated. I was just like blinking into the world. Like, what is this? But after seeing so many covers, and after seeing the pushback and the backlash against some covers as like juxtaposed to what the story does, right now I'm like, okay, what is this cover doing? What is the story about? Who gets to be on the cover? I think it's very interesting that we get a snake in the cover, on the cover of Beasts of Prey, and neither Kofi nor Ekon. And I don't think that they're on, and now on paperback they are, but that's not what came out first, which is interesting because the book is blackety black, 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 number one. And number two, that's an interesting choice to make in a time where Black people on the covers are selling. To choose to still have a majority matte Black cover with a pop of color, and the one living thing on it is a snake. And just thinking about those choices and what the statement behind it may be, or the thought process behind it, gets you into sort of thinking about what you want to consider when you're making your own. And so I think that a part
right,
about,
because if you think about the UK covers of Ray Bear and Redemptor, they're all animals. There are no humans.
and this is the American one, like this is the US.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
cover.
Like there's a difference, right? Like there did become a human cover for that one, but in the UK
Right,
there
yeah.
isn't one at all for Ray Bear and Redemptor.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that's a good point to bring up, that when we're talking about craft, we often talk about the writing of the book. And yes, like the creation of the book is business, but as an artist, you can acknowledge that there are artistic elements to the business of it, right? Like the cover. You can have a wealth of reasons to have a cover that you want a particular way, and they can be culturally inflected, they can be artistic preference. Like there's a lot of different things. So yes, it is a business to creation of books, but there's also still a craft to producing the book as well.
Right, because the part of that we have to acknowledge is like all of these things come together for how much a person likes a book, right? Like we've talked about how not liking a narrator for an audiobook has made us all drop a book down a star because the narrator wasn't right, because it's part of the package. It's part of how you crafted this book, right? So it's not just the writing, right? It can be the typography, it can be the pages, it can be like
how small is the font?
The font, like these are all things. And so again, for the crafting of a book, which is what we're doing, you have to remember that it goes beyond just the words you write. Yeah.
And then we'll move on. But like how we have seen plenty of videos, whole videos of like a book tag about beautiful covers that I have not actually read. Right. So like it's a thing. It matters. But as far as like how do I go about it after I pay my careful attention? How do I go about studying it, or how do I go about like applying it?
What is the process? So what is when you open a book and you're like, I'm gonna use this book to study craft, what does that look like for you when you're studying it?
Yeah, well, especially because I audio book it, I have to pay real good attention, because I prefer audiobooks just to be able to like read at all, because otherwise I wouldn't be reading anything. That's the truth. But when a book reaches a certain threshold, I'm like, I have to buy this. I'm gonna have to buy this, because I know I'm gonna need to go back and annotate. As it is, and This Is How to Stay Alive is the only book that I've annotated like I really want to, right? But this is what studying craft looks like for me, and it's complex, right? And I bring my English background to it. I bring my literary analysis to it, but that's part of it for me. And also, like, it goes by genre. This Is How to Stay Alive is a very literary, speculative fiction book, and so it was a very easy blend of like critical theory and literary analysis, one, because another author is involved in those discourses, and two, because the book just yielded itself to that. But that process for me when I'm reading is, I got a highlighter, I got a pencil. Like, I don't have tabs in Tutu, but Tutu definitely was a book where I was like, I want to mark this Joker all the way up. I like Shay has told it multiple times, I was paying very, very close attention to those sentences. And I guess this is the thing. What it looks like for me is based off of what I value, right? And the genres that I read and how I want to write. So similarly to when we were talking last year, I think it was, about the importance of good CPs, and like, you and your CPs don't need to be good at the same things, don't need to be complementary, right? I I read books. The books that I read, I'm like, oh, this is a good book for studying craft. Those are books that do things better than I do them. Right. So if I'm like, I value sentences and I read a book that I'm like, oh, these sentences are popping, I'm paying really close attention to those sentences. So that could look like me putting a bookmark in the audio, and writing a note, thinking about, and I just start making little traces. So for instance, when I heard Splendor, I was like, oh. And so I wanted to listen then from then on, what is the language doing? Because the language in Beasts of Prey is very it's beautiful. Like it really is beautiful. And so for me, it was like, how does the naming of the magic system affect the way that the mundane and the magical are discussed for the rest of the book, and listening to that and hearing it. So then I hadn't really thought about magic, like naming magic systems as particularly important. I mean, I think it's a cool part of the job description, but it wasn't like, this is important. After listening to Beasts of Prey, I was like, wait, this is really setting the tone for the discourse. And so I pick a theme. Once I decide or ascertain how important that thing is to the rest of the story, I trace that one thing and see how many other elements in the book are being affected by that one thing. How many other elements in the book are being affected by the naming of the magic system, Splendor. And from my study, I would say a lot, or at least that was my first cue to the way magic was going to be discussed in this very beautiful way, right? As something that is above the normal, but that has a relationship to the normal. So that's my lofty response, but that's really what I do. Like, I really be writing entire papers in my head and in my voice notes to Shay about the smallest things and how they're affecting everything else in the novel for me.
I'm very similar as far as like, I'm definitely like highlighting when I'm studying a fiction book. There's definitely like a notebook page with like the title of the book that I'm reading, where I'm at in the book, and what it made me think or feel. A lot of times I'm writing notes about how this scene made me feel about a specific story I'm writing, or where I could see how I could take this scene and maneuver it to make it work for the story that I'm trying to tell. So like, examples like reading Walter Mosley's Devil in a Blue Dress, and the friendship between Mouse and I cannot think of old boy's name right now. Whatever, the main character, can't think of his name, but you know what I'm talking about. It'll be on the screen because y'all know I'll figure it out in a minute or whatever. Or like Frank Peretti and The Oath, and seeing how he made a metaphor last an entire novel, and like a metaphor that was like an actual entity, right? Because like when I read The Undead Truth of Us, I got to see a smaller metaphor stretched for a whole book, but it was actually like a metaphor, a theme, something that you couldn't really see, that wasn't tangible. But for Frank Brady, no, it's an actual beast that lives and breathes and affects the actual world. That's a whole different realm of sci-fi. And then you have the religious aspect of it, which again, you don't see a lot of. So I know specifically reading his stuff this summer, as much as me and you both read, there was a lot of studying going on of how he applied these things to the story, how he also used the language for his audience, right? There is no part of me that thinks that Frank Peretti does not have a very extensive vocabulary, but his book is not overrun with very extensive vocabulary words, because the truth of the matter is he knows his audience. They're not trying to bring a dictionary to read this story, right? And he knows like the amount of horror his audience can take, right? Like, I don't think there's a lot of horror to his books. I think there's a lot of thriller elements, but he's called the Stephen King of Christian fiction, right? Because he knows his audience, and he knows that's what they're going to see, right? That's what they're going to get out of it, regardless of what he's actually doing and telling them the story. And so for me, it takes like, I'm reading things multiple times. I cannot say that I've studied anything that I've only read once. I have to read it multiple times. And every time I read it, I'm getting something different, right? I've read The Visitation no less than 20 times in my life. And when I read it last year, after I finished Karma Always Comes Back, and you read the scene where like Sally has just been visited by an angel, that is almost an entire chapter, like a whole section of a chapter. And not once does he use the words fear or afraid. But the entire section, she was afraid by that encounter. And I was like, why didn't I read this before I started writing this short story? I literally used afraid and fear I don't have any time. But now when I'm going forward in stories, I'm like, no, how do I show that? How do I let you feel that she's afraid without ever having to say the word? And what do? I go back and pick up The Visitation and I read that section again. And I think about, okay, why do I feel afraid of reading this? Why do I feel like I can feel what she's feeling? How do I give that to my reader? So for me, it's a lot of learning to reenact feelings and emotions by reading, by taking notes, by being like, okay, when I read this and this line said this, what did I think? What did I picture? And if you've read my stories, I'm a very visual person, so I write very visually. So it's really easy. Now, obviously, if you have the condition where you can't picture it, but it's very easy to picture it because I'm like, I see it, and I'm trying to get you to see what I see. And where did I get that from? The authors that I read, because they're very good at getting you to see that picture. So I feel like that answers the question. And so then question number 2: how do you apply what you study? I thought that was great.
It was a very good segue. Hold on. This is the part that I was like, whoo, when you said it to me before we started, I was like, now this could really get us off track, but I'm gonna say it because this is my experience. How do I apply it? Very carefully. Very carefully, because being in spaces like BookTube or like bookish spaces in general, you're either you yourself are reading a lot or you're around a lot of people who are talking about a lot of different books, which is not a problem inherently. As a writer, it's very easy, especially when I was like aspiring to trad pub. It's so easy to get swept along and, oh, I understand that I can learn something from this person, to trying to imitate that person to get their results being traditional publishing, right? And so when I say, how do I apply what I learned from these books, I apply it very carefully, because I have been, and I've had stories, just one story in particular, suffer a lot of unnecessary revision from allowing too many influences to try to come in on it, because my head isn't clear about, that was cool, it had an excellent effect in their book, but what is the purpose of your book? What is the goal of your characters? What is the tone of your book? You need that? And so I think for anyone studying craft, you have to be a student of yourself first. You have to be a student of your stories first. What's going on? What are the strengths of the book before you start trying to shore up the weaknesses, right? Like, it's important to know what the story does well. Otherwise, when you come in contact with another story that you feel is better, you don't necessarily know how to qualify that betterness that you feel. You just know that they are where you want to be. You put them in a position of authority over your stories, and now you are sort of lost in the sauce. You don't really know how to write. You feel like you can't write. That has happened to me. And so I'm saying, when I study, I have to be very cognizant of the purpose of my story, the purpose of my characters, and what the story is already doing. And then I can make a better estimation of how, or even if, I can bring in any of the things that I've seen in another story. Like, if I'm like, oh, in Tutu, I love the zombie grammar of Tutu. I'll say it all day. I do. I think it is jarring and curious, but faithful to the theme in such a compelling and unique way. I think it's glorious. When I think about, oh, how can I play with sentences like that in like #first fantasy? #first fantasy isn't doing that. right? Like it's not, do you see the way that Shay and I started shaking our head at the same time? Hashtag first man saying about that business, right? Like that's just not what it's doing. It's doing a lot. It's doing a lot of good things, but that doesn't really fit into what the story is doing. It would be distracting. It would be a departure, right? And so, and not just like if I did exactly what Brittany did. If I tried to play with my sentences in any sort of hyper stylized way, it would distract. It would distract, right? And also, none of my characters would talk like that. It's in first person. And so knowing that is important to me, being like, wow, I love the way that the grammar is also implicated into the theme of the story. That's something I want to study. And maybe another project I work on can think about how the grammar can be implicated. But I think it's as important to know how to apply and when to apply what you study as the fact of studying itself is, if that makes sense.
Just because you learn and study something now doesn't mean you're going to use it right now. Like that's the truth. Like you use it later on in a different exam, in a different project, in a different course. Like that's just life. So I think that makes perfect sense. I think for me, it's definitely in maneuvering how I like use the notes to like, okay, I kind of said this is how I want to use this in the story. Now let me actually like write it and let me create it and craft it in this way. And then let me give it to my critique partners, let me get it to my alpha readers and beta readers and see, am I getting the emotion that I expected to get from writing this? Did you laugh where I expected you to laugh? If you didn't, why didn't you? Did you get the clue I expected you to get right here? Did you get the red herring I expected you to get right here? Did you get these things? Did this throw you off like I wanted it to throw you off? Like these are things like that. To me, that's the point of our critique partners, alpha readers, beta readers. They are checkpoints to see if you met that match, you met that goal that you had. And when you were like, the key is to, know yourself beforehand. Again, it's like we said the same thing when it said to come into a critique partner. You have to know your style of writing. You have to know where you are as a writer. You have to know your strengths. You have to know what you can do. And you have to know where you need to grow, is the truth, right? You have to know where you are weak at. So like for me, and I'm fairly new to a lot of the literature terms, so, Britt, correct me if I'm wrong. But when I was reading Tutu, I felt that it was giving more like literary horror than like the horror that I was expecting with zombies, right? But it was so beautifully written, and it was such a like departure from the norm. And it was such a like, if I were, which y'all know me in YA, right? If I were to write a metaphor for young adults, this is how it should be done. Like you couldn't give young adults the oath and them appreciate it the way that an adult would, because it's deep. Like it's deep, it runs deep into that story. There's so many timelines, there's so many things you have to follow. It's a lot. And in Tutu, you get that. And you could see very early on that it's a metaphor for something, that something else is going on. But it is such a like watercolor stroke brush of doing it. It's just so like light, and it's like, I'm gonna touch on these things, but I'm not gonna make you cry. Like I'm not gonna beat you down with it, but I'm gonna make sure you get this lesson, and you're gonna see this, and I'm gonna put this layer there and this layer there. And it was such a great experience that it was like, there's two ways to do this. And it's different for who you're going after, right? Different genre, different age category, different everything. And I think that to me is the best part of like looking at crafting fiction and applying it, is like knowing what works for your story and how to do it, right? And it's so much easier than just somebody giving you instructions. Like it just is. It's like, this is how you make this happen, right? Again, I talk about this all the time. One of my favorite videos of describing Black skin is Jordan Ifueko reading about like the skin looking like the color of earth, and people wanting to just give themselves to, and like just the way that she wrote that was like a master class And just hearing that, she didn't have to tell you, use these type of adjectives, describe it, compare it to this noun and do it this way.
And she couldn't have, like, she couldn't have told you how to do that without showing you how it's done.
Exactly. And then that takes us into the, do you study differently based on genre and or age category? If so, how? And I'll take point on this one because, I was already in that way. It's, yes, I do, right? So, you know me, I'm the thriller, horror, mystery writer in this, right? So for me, y'all know I'm blackity black, black, black. And so I read blackity black, black, black. But the truth is, the type of thrillers I like, the type of thrillers I want to read, the type of thrillers that I love, there's not a lot of Black writers to study from. And there's not a lot of Black authors in that fiction realm that are giving what I want to give, right? Not saying that there aren't Black writers in there, so don't want y'all to like it. Actually, I know they exist. I'm reading them or have read them, I know. But there are things and elements in which the thriller genre is very heavily over-dominated by specific types of people, right? Because there's a specific type of way that they tell the stories that the people that love that genre category go for, right? And that they expect. And so I want to be me in doing it, but I also want to learn from those that have built a lifelong career off of this genre, right? Like, that's a completely different thing, right? And when I'm looking at lifelong careers from Black authors in the mystery genre, I have it. Now, they have some thriller elements to it, but mystery, we got Walter Mosley, we got Rachel Howzel, we got Attica Locke, right? And they get into that little thrillery elements and stuff, but like, that's not their primary focus, right? So I have to look at when I'm studying thrillers differently than when I'm studying mysteries, right? When I'm studying cozy mysteries, I have to look at how cozy mysteries are crafted and what they expect. And then I also have to compare that to what I want to bring out, right? Do I want to be confined to this cozy mystery space that has been dominated by white women, right? That became an offshoot of a romance, even in that, right? So there's things that they expect and that they want and that they no very little cussing, no real on-page bloody death, no, real on-page sex, like those type of things that they don't want, that have become a staple of this genre category. I have to know those things before I'm ready to go in, what is the word, subvert convention? Is that what I want to say, right? Is that what I want to say? Right. Before I want to go in there and be like, nah, I'm not going to give you a dead body the first book. I know that's what y'all say y'all want, but how would I know that, right? Because I have to study and I have to know and I have to make it a priority to know what my audience, right? And what that requires. Also, like age categories, again, how teenagers accept metaphors in books and learn lessons is going to be very different from how adults accept metaphors and learn lessons. How Christians versus secular people versus atheists versus African Americans versus Asian Americans, everyone accepts and tells stories in different ways. And in order to, one, be accurate in how I want to tell the stories I want to tell, I have to become well versed in how they tell their own stories, how those things come out, right? And so a lot of it is, for me, being well read, right? You hear it all the time. You can't be a good writer if you're not a good reader, right? And I've said this multiple times this year. This is probably the most widely read year of my entire life, because of all the things I've been a part of this year. And I can say with full confidence, Black is where it's at. So there's that. But also, I am learning so much about writers from other diasporas and how they tell stories that I never realized. I am, one, seeing just how much the white gaze dominates everything, right? And it's like, I'm reading Black books more than anything, so I can see it super close there. But now that I'm expanding and we're reading the crime writers of color and it's everybody all over the world, and I'm like, oh no, the white gaze is in this book too, and in this book too, and in this book too. And it's like, okay, so you learn ways in which to combat that just by reading other things, You learn ways in which it can come off to somebody who isn't from where you're from, how they can see it, right? It's just, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but it's just so much that you get from just reading the other books and understanding that in each age category, in each genre, there are different conventions that have to be met for it to be successful. And so to open yourself up to that is honestly, I think, what makes good writers, right? Is why whenever I'm in author interviews, my number one question to an author is, what's a great example of craft in a fiction book to you? Now, mind you, the number of authors that don't know how to answer that question always give me a craft book rather than a fiction book is beyond me. But it just goes back to how many of us actually study fiction itself.
I mean, basically everything that you said, right? Like, I'm not in mystery, thriller, horror, but everything has a convention, whether it's age category or genre. You need to know what both of those things are. For instance, can I drop an F-bomb in a YA? You can, actually. More than you think. Now, do I want to? No, but like, do I need to know that if I'm going to be writing adult and YA? Yeah, you do need to know where the language will be better received, particularly if you want to do tri-pub. It matters less if you don't. However, there is something to be said for not breaking convention just for the sake of breaking convention, right? Because you don't want your book to look like an ugly duckling. Like, it just don't know what we doing in this party room, right? So like, self-publishing doesn't mean that I'm not gonna pay attention to any of the conventions. I am. I'm just not going to be ruled by them when I need it to stretch or bend in a particular way. But like, some of the conventions make sense. And also to what Shay said, they are there for a reason. When I am studying romance, Gwen Hayes is really, really good at romancing the beat to be like, the theme of your book is love conquers all. That it is. If that's not the theme that you want, you're not writing a romance, and that's okay. You're just not writing a romance. And you need to know that, because your readers are going to be upset if you try to say something is a romance and it does not capitulate to these conventions. You're going to get backlash, and backlash is financial. Yes. So like, let's not play with the people about what you're giving them. And so I think there is real value in studying just straight up, what does each of these stories have to have in a particular genre? And then also studying to decide if there are certain things that seem convention, but that you don't necessarily like I've talked about before in YA, this trend of bad parenting. I mean, it's a trend. It's a thing that happens. Readers straight up expect it at this point, but readers don't demand it. It's not a requirement. And I don't want to represent bad parents, particularly bad Black parents, in my books. There's already plenty of representation out there. I'm not trying to add to it. We're gonna go this way, right? And so I think that's another place where study will serve you, because then you can see not only what do readers expect, but what do I want to give readers? And is that going to be something that I have to really, really finesse? Am I going to really have to set up why I'm not showing Black parents? No. Well, I'm not showing bad parents? No, I'm not. But if I were going to need to, I would need to know that's some work ahead of me. And so craft also helps you prepare your book for the audience that you want to target, or to target a particular convention that you want to subvert, right? So for me, when I'm studying particular categories, I look a lot at what are the tropes that are thriving there, what are the character types that are thriving there, and what are like plot points that are thriving. Like we spoke about in When Formula Backfires, killing the mentor, and at the end of the second act, thrives in fantasy, adult and YA, I would say. Like it's a thing. I feel like killing it happens more in the YA, actually. But regardless, it thrives in fantasy that I have seen, right? When there's an adventure to be had, the mentor is probably going to take a nosedive into a shallow grave during the second act. It's an expectation, but I don't have to do it, right? I can have that mentor or that supporting character, whomever they are, step back in a different way to let the character finish the course on their own so they can learn their lesson. It doesn't have to be death. So that's another part where it's like, you got to study to know what's expected. And after you see what is expected, then you want to look at like, is it demanded though? Like, if I don't do this, am I not doing fantasy? Like, if they don't end up together at the end at all, you didn't do a romance. Are there things I need to know about fantasy that are similar? So that those are the main things that I look at, are the tropes, the character types, and the plot expectations.
I will actually had to piggyback on something you said. I also read my contemporaries, or like what would be my contemporaries, especially in the trad pub arena. And I specifically, I have this thing where I read authors who I don't necessarily like. Now this is specifically for me because I want to make sure that what I'm writing is combating the narrative that they're pushing that I dislike. So, like Britt was saying, you have negative Black parents. I refuse to have that. I'm combating that narrative, right? You have this narrative that Black girls need to be loved unconditionally, and da 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 da. And your narrative, white boys are the only ones that can give them that. In my narrative, Black boys are giving them that. Like, there are just things that I'm just going to combat because I don't like that. And I don't like that I'm automatically going to be compared to you because I'm in this genre. So if I'm automatically going to be compared to you because of my race, my gender in this genre, because we're contemporaries, then let me go ahead and go against what I don't like. Let me show that I'm making and creating my own path. Because the truth is, y'all know me, I'm not going to sit here and be like, I don't like this girl's book and then let her blur it for mine, right? Because no, I want you to know that there's a difference. Like, I don't want to go down this lane. I'm setting and creating a path for myself, but I can't do that if I don't know what you're doing. Like, that's just me. You know what they say, keep your friends close, your enemies closer. Know your enemy is, yourself. I'm just saying, just be aware.
So you might want to read your enemy's book.
Right.
And of course, we're being dramatic. It's not
dramatic
an enemy
in the word
situation.
enemy, but more in the, like, you are an enemy to the stories I want to put out for Black children, full stop. So maybe not me as a person, but you are an enemy to the mission that I feel like I'm put on this earth to do. And that's to uplift my community. I don't feel your work does that. And I don't want mine to be lumped in the same category with yours. And in order for that to happen, I have to make sure my stuff is what? Set apart. You heard it. Okay. So the last one, go to and or most recent fiction books that you studied for craft.
Here's the thing. I have a long TBR of books that I want to study for craft, but I 100% agree with you that you can't really call it study if you don't return to it. And also, like, I'm thinking deeply about it, but the chances of me like remembering it to apply it on a larger scale, a particular thing about your story that stuck in my head, I'll remember that. But like, more and smaller things about your story that all went into me liking it, I won't if I don't go back and like. Now, y'all know me with physical books. It's gonna take me a lot of time to go back and do that for any fiction book. And also, I just don't have any space in my apartment right now to purchase physical books. But that's the only way that I can do the study that I would want to do, because I'm tactile. So to study a book, I do need to buy it and highlight it. And I'm not doing that until I move, because books are heavy, which makes them expensive to ship. So depending on how far I move, it's going to be expensive to ship these books that I already have. We're not buying anything else until I get there. So then the books that I actually really study right now, I don't actually have any of them physically. It's books that I have listened to again and again and again, not even books that I have to annotate, because I don't like reading physical books. And I don't have time to read them right now. So I just have not. So the books that I have been returning to the most, and y'all will not be surprised by these answers, is number one, or number one isn't like, she was here first, Alexandria House. I have, another thing about study, we could say this too, I just think it behooves one to read the breadth of an author's work if you're going to study them. I think that's useful, particularly if it's a series, to see how they develop the storylines over that series, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm saying is because I have read literally most of the books that Alexandria House has written. And I made a study of her in that way. Now, I came to her as a reader who was just hungry for a good Black book where they were loving each other. But especially now thinking through like the romance, the way she had them, the way she wrote family amazed me, right? The fact that it didn't seem difficult, it seemed natural that they were there. Alexandria House is definitely someone that I go to like soak in, how do I knit family into the geography of my characters? I go to Alexandria House for, how do I show love in a lot of different ways, right? How do I show insta love that isn't annoying? How do I and it's believable, because like insta love is a trope and people just take it for what it is, but and if it's unrealistic, we're like, it's insta love, we let it pass, right? But like Alexandria House has done some insta love that actually felt believable. How did that happen, right? So like that, how to stage love between traumatized people, right? And so like I go to Alexandria House for a lot of questions about romance, because she's done a lot of different, she's done most, if not all, of the tropes, and she's written a lot of different kind of people. And so Alexandria House is definitely my go-to for romance. I would call myself a student of her romance way more than I would ever call myself a student of Theodora Taylor. I read Theodora Taylor, and not for nothing, I do like some parts of her writing. I really do. Like the books of hers that I can't put down, it's because the writing is compelling. Like Stone, Her Ruthless Enforcer, which I have like a talk about it on my channel. I'm always gonna read Stone. I am. Rashid, Her Ruthless Boss. Am I always gonna read Rashid? No, I'm not. But I do find some scenes in that exceedingly compelling. And I think about them actually pretty routinely, like, well, why? What was revealed? What did he say? Right. So like there I have my romance people, and I rank them accordingly to like how much of their ways I would be willing to produce proudly. So for romance, it's definitely Alexandria House. Frank Peretti, revolutionary for my writing, really. I'm making a slow study now. Like that's actually the book that I am studying is This Present Darkness. Now I'm studying it as a Bible student, but still just breaking down how many layers there are to his story. Like I'm in a position to study that now, and it is overwhelming isn't the word. Compelling would be a word. Impressive is another one. He is someone that I'm looking at not in any particularly genre specific way, as like not mystery, thriller, horror, right? But like as someone who wants to infuse all of their work with Christian values. I'm looking at the way that was done without being heavy-handed for him, like in a way that didn't have me like, another scripture, like, can we please just talk? Why do we have to? I get it, right? Like John 3:16, God loves us, cool, right? Like it's not that. So how am I enjoying this book for what it is? How am I enjoying the scripture that's here, but that is not overstated? And so Frank Peretti definitely is a go-to for me just across the board with all of my books for how can I mirror this effect, right? It's an effect for me with him. And then the last one is the Amaranthian Saga. Please. If you were surprised, you've been paying no attention. I was not surprised
by not a one of these three answers.
Of course not. Because I read them often. Like, if you were surprised by any of those picks, you have not been paying attention to me at all, which is fine. You don't have to, but just know that you've been missing a lot. So the Amaranthian Saga, I read for intricacy. Forthright and also Alexandria House, one of the things I love about her the most is that continuity is such a thing. Circularity is such a thing, right? Like, something will come up in book 1 that comes up again in book 3, and it's like, oh, that's what she meant when she was like, you know, we're going through some hard times, and now we're in book 3, and it's your book, you going through some hard times. Like, I like that we get to see, like, explore more of the world the deeper into the series we get, and more of the world as in the businesses of the world. Like, there are businesses mentioned in the McLean Brothers series, and you meet the owner of that business in their own love story in like the Love After series. I love that you really
didn't do as easily in Tribe Cub. Which you couldn't do as easily in Tribe Cub.
You can't, because they own the rights to that, right? So like that was one of the times when I was like, oh, this might be a real showstopper. But I love the circularity in Alexandria House. I love how Forthright does it as well. Those tie-ins between, and now like Amaranthian Saga is its own world, like it's one series, but there's like the main series, then there are like novellas that are about the myths of the people, there are interludes. I really look at Forthright and I have read every single book in that series at least 3 times. At least. And like really probably upwards of like 5. And what I really take is how to immerse someone in a world. That's really what I'm looking for. I'm listening to everything like, how am I already so deep in this world? It's chapter 1. Like how am I already in it? So like those are my go-tos for particular effects that I want to produce. That was a lot. I didn't think I was going to go for that long, but you know me and my favorites. I could talk for
you're fine. So you gave 3, I'll give 3. So off top, same on the list, Frank Peretti. I have been reading him since I was a child. So like at least 20 years. Of just reading and rereading and reading and rereading and just loving the way the stories made me feel. And I've always known that I was gonna write thriller and mystery based off of like the stories that I read by him and wanting to know like, how do you get to this? Like, why is it this way? What is going on? And I will add to that now. I won't say I have studied him as lately as before, but someone that I've studied a lot of and read a lot of, John Grisham, as well. Him and Frank Peretti I started reading them around the same time. So both of their styles of storytelling and the thrilling nature kind of like blended for me. And I knew that those were like 2 people I wanted to like emulate, tell my stories, but give you the like conviction and feeling that their stuff gave you, right? Like there's a reason most of John Grisham's books have become movies, right? Like you want to see them, they're compelling, they bring it out of you. But as of now, I would say again Frank Brody, and then I would say N.K. Jemisin. Since I started reading her book, almost everything that I own, I've read twice. I'm on my 2nd read of The City We Became Now, as the book 2 comes out next month. She made me go from this is too much for me, up above my head, I can't get it, to I'm gonna finish this, and oh my God, where's book 2, 3, 4? What else she's written? I gotta eat it up. And if you know me, you know I don't change my mind often. So if you got me to change my mind, the truth is you did an amazing job and you deserve all my coins. It's the truth. And so I love it. if you know me, you know how like I love dual timelines. And NK Jemisin and her dual timeline, she gonna give it to you. She gonna twist your world upside down, and I love it. And I read it and I get excited and I study and I'm like, if I can make somebody make me feel how she made me feel when I finished the 5th season, I did my job. If I can make somebody feel the way I felt when I finished the Kingdom of Gods and see a story was done.
Let's just stop and just put a little wow on it, because I really don't think I can remember clearly the last time I felt so satisfied by a series ending. I was like, I'm okay with that.
I was like, yo, and I low key, I was like, you know, this is a tease, right? Because you totally could give us a whole new world now.
100%.
You can totally give us a whole new world.
The door is open. Let me walk through.
Come on now.
Satisfaction.
Love.
Satisfaction. Go on. Contentment.
Love. And last but not least, y'all know I don't mess with YA like that. But if I'm gonna mess with YA, I gotta talk about one queen and one queen only, Elizabeth Acevedo. I love her story. I am like sick waiting for her first adult book to see what she does with that when it comes out, because I think it's either next year or 2024, one of the two. But I am beyond excited for it because of the Black YA that I have read in recent years. Now, we've gotten so much better friendships in these new ones. I will acknowledge that, you know, in Ray Bear and Redemptor, we get decent friendships.
That's what I thought you were going to say, but then when you said Elizabeth, I was like, oh, yeah, her bestie.
Yeah. Like, I love Jordan. I do. But y'all also know my bag is contemporary. Like, fantasy is not at all what I write, and I'm going to dabble in it one day, but your girl ain't ready. It's a lot of work. Your girl already trying to do mysteries, and that's a lot. So it's like, But I love her Black women friendships, especially for girls. Like, I love that from Alexandria House. I love that it's always like a Black woman and she got her some good friends, and they might be wild and they all might be crazy, but they loyal as all get out. And I love that Elizabeth Acevedo is doing that for our young women. I love that that's there. And I do. And I want, whenever I read it, I don't feel like it was meant for me. I don't ever read it and I don't ever be like, I can relate to this, because I shouldn't, because I'm a good 15 years older than the people it's written for, so let's start there. Right? I'm always satisfied to know that there's a new generation that gets this, that this is the representation they get. And that's what I study from her. I study the culture that she brings to it, and she doesn't explain. She doesn't, you don't, if you know, you know, if you don't, you don't. Like, and I love it, and I love that unapologeticness. As a poet, I love the poetry that comes even to her novels that aren't in verse. I love the way she uses poetry to paint a picture. And if ever I write a novel in verse, I'm definitely putting her in the acknowledgments, even though she ain't ever met me, because, like, yo, inspired is not the word. Like, can't even. So for me, those are three people that I have read over and over since I first started reading them, because their stories take me to a whole different place. They make me reflect. They make me think. They make me feel. And they make me remember that this is what I want to do with my words. And there's something invigorating about that. About reading somebody that gets you pumped up to write your own words. Like, there's something about that. And those three authors, they do it for me. So yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think that's the thing. If craft makes you feel like you can't do it, you're reading the wrong stuff.
Right.
maybe that's something for you to read 10 years from now, but you need to read crafts that meet you where you are and makes you feel like you can get to your next level,
Right.
not their next level. Because me and Nora are not the same.
Oh yeah, nope, she got
We
that.
are not the same,
She
but
got that.
I can get something from her. But she's not where I go to let me read her for craft. I don't read in Jemisin for craft because I know I'm not there yet. I'm not about to be making a Maslow's hierarchy of needs for all my characters. I don't want to. Right. So like we're not in that, I'm not in that place yet. Maybe in 10 years I'll be like, I really need to
But it's also it was like what you were saying about Frank Peretti, that it's not the like mystery thriller aspects, it's the other, all right? Like cause like for me, it was how she got y'all rooting for origins, not realizing y'all rooting for Black people. When you have to sit with that, best served cold. All because of NK. Like, when you realize what you got to sit with at the end of the book because you done spent this whole time, NK taught me that. That's acknowledgement. NK taught me that. Nora, I was on Nora's master class.
Like, who are these people?
Oh yeah, they're gonna be like, oh my God, she really was. Yes. I wasn't the inventor of this. I saw this and I was like, ooh, let me put the Shay.
And at the same time, we cite Black women all day long.
Black women all the time. You see, I said acknowledge her and Elizabeth. They was both getting acknowledged. Yes. They may never know the book exists, but they got acknowledged. They did.
Yeah. This is such an important conversation to not to have all the time necessarily, but just to be continually thinking about what are who are your artistic interlocutors, right? Like who do you go to when your well is dry? Because as writers, I feel like when I'm really like the spirit is upon me, I'm tired, and I'm still like I can't stop until I get this scene out. Mm-hmm. That's when I'm writing from the overflow. And that's what you need. You want to be writing from the outpouring, not, oh, it's a dry and barren land, but let me do a rain dance. Like you want to have a well full and then have plenty to share out. And that overflow is where your story pours out of you. And reading Peretti and House and Forthright and Jemisin, like reading these people, find your people who give you your outpouring, who give you your overflow. I think that is the thing to take away from all of this. Who are your artistic interlocutors that give you that overflow from which you write?
I agree. All right, guys. Well, we want to thank you guys so much for being here, whether you're watching now on the premiere with us or on the replay. We do appreciate you so very much. Y'all, we only got really like one more original episode left, and then we're in our recap for the year. This year has went by super duper fast, honestly. Like, really fast. I'm excited, though. So we will see y'all next month on Brit's channel, and then we'll be hitting y'all with 2 in December on both of our channels. All right, y'all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next month. Bye.